Hello everyone, this is official. I am making you a matcha Swiss roll cake with raspberry cream, and you have been fantastic about sending me your questions about making a Swiss roll, so I really know what to focus on as we get to it. So let's start right off with the key ingredient, the matcha tea powder. Now you can buy green tea, of course, in leaf form or in a tea bag, but for this recipe, you'll want to buy the powder. You can, if you don't have access to the matcha tea, you can use other tea flavors. Hermione was asking, are there other flavors I can use? Any tea flavor that you can infuse into milk would suit appropriately. So I would gear towards, I think an Earl Grey would be beautiful. I think a regular green tea, a jasmine tea, would have a wonderful flavor to it. If you think about hibiscus tea, sometimes called zobo in Africa, hibiscus lends a purple-pink color and a beautiful tart acidity, which would be marvelous in this recipe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my 1 tablespoon of matcha powder to a 1/4 cup of milk. And when I was first playing with this recipe, I'm going to put this over low heat for a second and give it a little whisk just to stir the matcha powder. And I'll bring it over here so you can get a better look at it in a second. And I just lost my train of thought because I was paying attention to what I was doing. Originally, this recipe did not call for milk in the recipe. And when I first tried adding the matcha powder straight to my eggs as I was whipping them, I found that in the baked cake, I could taste a graininess and a bitterness, which I was not fond of. So there's a real advantage to cooking out the tea into the milk to infuse the flavor evenly. So that way, when you taste a bite, you get that beautiful, well-rounded matcha green tea flavor, but it's not bitter and it's not overwhelming or at all gritty tasting. So it only takes a couple of minutes to let this infuse. And the good news is you can work with this milk while it's warm. So while you've got it on low heat, and the reason I want you to have it on low heat is only because I don't want you to reduce the milk volume any. We want the 1/4 cup, the 60 ml for the recipe, so I don't want you to cook it down or boil it. Most tea does not like, black tea likes boiling water, but green tea and herbal teas like just under boiling. So again, you don't get that bitterness come through. So while we're letting that green tea steep, I'm going to separate my eggs. So the first thing I'm going to do, most Swiss rolls, these jelly roll style cakes, the key to their success is their airiness, but also their flexibility, because you want to be able to roll the cake without its cracking. That's the big challenge with a Swiss roll cake. Many recipes call for separating the eggs, and you'll find I have 2 other Swiss roll recipes. Actually, I have 3 right here on the OEM channel, and they each vary a little bit depending on how I'm getting to that end result. And I'll talk about those differences. But separating the eggs is common. I'm going to whip the whites first for the simple reason is that then I don't have to wash my bowl and I can put the yolks in afterwards. So we're going to whip the whites and then whip the yolks after. So you'll separate your 3 eggs. Oh, and I'll be right back because now I broke an egg. And I don't want the yolk in the bowl. So I'm going to give it a quick wipe. I'm coming right back. Don't worry. This is the fun with doing a live video. Reality happens. This is what you don't see when you watch pre-taped videos. So now I've got the yolk out, but I want to make sure the bowl is clean. And I better grab an extra egg. I've got my vinegar here, and this is the real world. You get to see me scramble a little bit. We won't scramble those eggs though. So I've just got some vinegar here, cider vinegar. And I'm just going to wipe out the inside of my bowl where that yolk came in contact. And that way I know, because if you get any fat on the inside of the bowl, you won't get a full volume from your whites. And that's why we're whipping the whites first and the yolks second, because then you really would have to clean the bowl well. Now let's see if we can do this better the second time around. We're just giving more time for the tea to steep. let me take a peek. How's everyone doing here? I'm just going to scroll down so I can see the questions come in. We've got some equivalences. 100 grams of butter, half a cup or 8 tablespoons. That's very close. I find 115 grams is the best equivalent to half a cup of butter. It's not fully the same as by volume. It's slightly less, where half a cup by metric volume is 125 milliliters. Butter by weight is 115 grams for half a cup. So that's a very good point to mention there. Crispy's asking, can I use tea? You can use any tea, and you can just drop the tea bag into the milk itself and squish it around a little bit, or you can alternatively break the tea bag into the milk. It'll infuse faster, but you have to make sure you strain the tea leaves out. So a very good question. Serena is asking the question we all want to know is how to avoid the cracks when you're rolling up the Swiss roll. And when I get to the point of rolling up this Swiss roll, I will definitely be talking about that. So we've got the 3 whites in the mixer, and now I'm going to pull my matcha milk off the heat. You can work with it in this recipe warm. That doesn't mean I want it terribly hot. In fact, I'm going to transfer this to a bowl just to cool down a little bit, because while a Swiss roll is a sponge cake, it's different than a Genoise sponge, which is whipping whole eggs with sugar. It's also different than a hot milk sponge, which is whipping whole eggs and sugar. You add your flour, and then you add a volume of hot milk, usually about 250 ml, to your sponge cake recipe to get a really fine bubble structure. What we're after for a Swiss roll is something a little bit different. I'm just going to put this into a wider, flatter bowl, and that way it will cool quickly. Ooh, that's quite the color combination, which actually brings up a point. Can you put it back? I sure can. Put that back. Yeah, it's got a great intensity to it. But you'll notice when you're using matcha tea, it has an earthy olive green color to it. But sometimes you'll see in bakeries that matcha tea desserts are a bright, vibrant green. And you can get that vibrant green by simply adding food coloring to the recipe. And I'll probably add a little bit too. So bear in mind, if you're making this recipe and you want that brighter green color, to add a little food coloring paste, powder, or gel will work. So now we want to whip up our whites to a stiff peak. You can use electric beaters, of course, if you want. And I've got my 100 grams of sugar, half a cup of sugar divided. So I'm saving 50 grams for the yolks, and I'm using 50 grams for the whites. So you'll start the mixer first, whip the whites until they get frothy, gradually add the sugar, and then keep whipping until you reach a stiff peak. Oh, I see the questions rolling in. I'm going to try and remember as many as I can. Any kind of sugar. You do want granulated white sugar, because if you use a brown sugar, you'll find you'll get a darker color to your sponge. And now I'll add the sugar. And we'll keep whipping until we reach a stiff peak. Charisma asks a great question. I hope you can hear me over the mixer. Charisma's asking, why do you gradually pour in the sugar? That's simply because the room temperature whites need a chance for the sugar to dissolve, and if you were to dump it in all at once, you could end up with little sugar crystals in your meringue, or it pulls down to the bottom. Great question. Let's take a look at these whites. They've still got a little movement to them. As you can see, they're dripping off the whisk, so I'm going to keep whipping. Marie and Natasha, thank you for re-asking your question. Is there anything you can use other than eggs to make a sponge cake? That's a challenging question. When replacing eggs in cream cakes, where you beat the butter and sugar and add the eggs, you have options like silken tofu and flax eggs. But with the sponge cake, you rely on the eggs for volume. There is a product, aquafaba, which is actually the liquid from canned chickpeas, which has protein in it. The protein comes out of the chickpeas, goes into the liquid. You can use that for egg whites. You would have to replace the egg yolk with something else. But I will say, Maria and Natasha, just for your benefit, I have not tested this recipe using aquafaba, so I don't know that it works. But I'd be willing to give it a try, or if you're willing to give it a try, let me know, and then I'll know how to better guide you. So I hope that helps. We're almost there. Okay, now we've got some volume. And if there's ever a doubt, should I whip some more or under whip? I would rather you slightly under whip than over whip. And you will be able to tell, you can see right now that my whites still have a smooth creaminess to them. If your egg whites look rough and craggy and dry and lose their shine, that's a sign they've been over whipped. And the fix is easy, it's just time. You can leave them, let them sit in the mixer. Because they're over whipped, they will collapse on themselves because they've been stretched to their biggest volume. Then what you can do is after about 5-10 minutes is go back to them and then on medium speed re-whip them, and you'll find the egg whites will collapse but then come back up again. So you don't have to throw them away and start again. So we've got our whites set aside. Now it's time for the 3 egg yolks and the remaining 50 grams or 1/4 cup of sugar. And for this recipe, because the matcha flavor is so pronounced and I want it to be so singular, I don't add vanilla extract to this recipe at all. I let the flavors shine, the matcha and the raspberry in the cream. So now I can use the same attachment, the same bowl, or if you're using electric beaters, you just move right from one bowl to the other, and we're gonna whip the yolks on high speed until they more than double in volume. They're gonna turn a buttery yellow and hold a ribbon when I lift the whisk attachment. And this will just take a minute, so I'll check on your questions. Shashank, you're asking that you don't like matcha, so you can use normal tea? Of course you can. Your favorite tea flavor, even a spiced tea, would be delicious in this recipe. A great question. Oh, and hello, Estella from California. And there we go. We've got, I think, was it Jordan was asking me about what my favorite dessert is. And I think that's a great question to add. It varies depending on the time of year. So Jordan, right here in Ontario, hothouse strawberries have started and rhubarb has started. So right now, anything with strawberry and rhubarb makes me happy and is my favorite dessert. But I like the idea of the sounds of your banana bread and those sour cream cookies. You may find if you're using a stand mixer, these eggs take a little bit to whip up, just because there's a small volume at the bottom of the bowl. I hope you can hear me over the mixer. I've been trained all these years not to talk while the mixer's going, but I figure my microphone is right here, so hopefully you can hear me. So I'd like to show you right now, we'll zoom in if we can, Michael. We've got a nice butter color, but you can see how the egg is dripping off the whisk and just collapsing into the batter base. That means we want to go a little bit longer on the mixer, just to really build in some structure and strength. It'll turn a little more pale at the same time and get a little thicker. And we've got plenty of time. We can do this. Your questions, oh, hello from Hampshire in England. Hello from Argentina. Sunny. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you like my top. I was actually very daring wearing something dark when I'm working with meringues. And, oh, good. I'm glad you can hear me over the sound of the mixer. And Jerry is asking, will I be doing a recipe for Father's Day? Well, I've mentioned this before. My dad's favorite cake is carrot cake. So and his birthday is right around Father's Day. So I'll probably be doubling up and making a carrot cake. And he's a fan of strawberry rhubarb pie, just like I am. So I might make that for the both of us. Great questions. Oh, hello. Hi, Hermione. Hello from Greece and Germany and Mexico and Costa Rica and Malaysia and Venezuela. I think it's fantastic that you're joining me from around the world and from close to home. Bonnie is just a few doors down the street and she knows she's going to get a taste of this Matcha Swiss Roll. And there we go. Now this has gone a lot thicker and paler in color. So that's what I mean about leaving a ribbon. It doesn't have to be solidified in any way, but you can see how I can draw a figure 8 or a circle and that pattern stays on top of the yolks. That's when you know you have it whisked enough. Now, part of the reason why we're going through this effort of adding the sugar to the whites and whipping them to a meringue and sugar to the yolks and whipping them to full volume is to give this sponge cake flexibility. And that's part of the key to the success. Celino, you were asking about preventing the Swiss roll from cracking as you roll it, building in that flexibility, getting the full volume, keep mixing those yolks. You can't overmix your yolks. This will give you a sponge cake that's flexible and less likely to crack. Also baking to the right doneness, not over baking your cake so that it's dry and cracks at the edges is also key. And then when it comes time to roll it, I'll have some other tips as well. So now we've got our yolk base, and I'm going to use the whisk attachment already since it's got everything on there. And I'm going to pour in my matcha tea powder and milk combination. So if it's still warm, that's okay. Get every last bit in. Just move this out of the way. And just use the whisk, or if you've got your electric beaters, just have them on low speed. And now this is where you can really see that sort of olive green or pea green color to the matcha cake, which doesn't immediately make you think of dessert. So this is where this is the point when you'd want to add a little food coloring. Don't do it sooner because you don't know how concentrated it will be. But I've got just a leaf green powder, and I'm just going to do a little sprinkling. And if you've got a gel or a liquid, you just add it and then whisk it in. And it just brightens up that green color just a little bit. You'll never fully lose that earthy color, but you can brighten it up a little bit. Now, the next move is to sift in the dry ingredients. So it doesn't take a lot of flour. I've got 1/3 cup of flour and 1/4 cup of cornstarch. And the reason I use the combination of the flour and the cornstarch is again for the flexibility and the tenderness. So the cornstarch helps lower the protein content in the flour, and that gives it the flexibility. We're relying on the eggs a lot when it comes to making a jelly roll sponge here. There we go, get all that cornstarch out. It's a little sticky because that's what it's made to do, stick. And we'll just sift that in all at once. Now, some of you, let's talk about my chocolate Swiss roll recipe that's on Oh Yum. And I should put a call out now. I see we're over 200 likes. I like it when you like my videos when we're doing it live because I know you're paying attention and watching. So please, let's hit 300 in terms of likes. But back to that chocolate Swiss roll. Michelle was asking about, just to point out, for my chocolate Swiss roll, to make it flexible, I whisk the egg yolks with granulated sugar, but I actually heat up and cook my sugar for my egg whites to a thread stage, 239 Fahrenheit or 240 Fahrenheit. And the reason I do that in that particular recipe is to build elasticity. It's all about building in that stretch. And the challenge with chocolate sponges, cocoa sponges, is cocoa absorbs a lot of liquid, and those cake batters can get dry so quickly and are more prone to cracking. So that's why I call for that technique in that recipe. And if you don't have a candy thermometer, you can boil your sugar, but what you need to do then is have a dish with ice cold water nearby. And what you do is as you're cooking your sugar, it will only take about 3 minutes, drop in the spoon, grab a little bit of sugar, put the spoon with the sugar in the ice cold water, count to 3, lift it up, and then it will have cooled down the sugar, but then pull it away with your fingers and it should come in a thread. And then you know you've cooked your sugar enough. So it literally earns its name because of the way it physically looks. So that helps you guide through the chocolate sponge recipe. And if you're really stuck on that, because Nakshanur was asking about that she was having cooked sugar issues. I do have a second chocolate Swiss roll recipe. If you look up my Black Forest roulade recipe right here on Oh Yum, it happens to be gluten-free. So I really rely on the sugar-egg combination. And by taking the flour out, I leave more room for the sugar and eggs to do their thing with the cocoa powder, and it doesn't have the cooked sugar step, and it's really delicious. And that Swiss roll cake, you don't actually shape while it's warm. You work with it once it's cooled to room temperature. So you've got lots of options out there. Okay, the last thing to do before we put this in the pan is take 1/3 of your whites and work that gently into your base batter, folding it in. And before you add the rest of your whites, it's okay if there's still a few streaks visible as you're folding. Pull from the bottom, lift up. But you can still see I have streaks in there. It's okay to add the rest of the whites at this point because we have another opportunity to fold. Just move this out of the way. And somehow I ended up with sticky fingers. There we go. And now we finish folding in these whites. It doesn't look like a lot of batter because it really isn't. It's only 3 eggs. When I make a Genoise sponge for a 9-inch, a 23-centimeter pan, it calls for 6 eggs. So because we want this thin but fluffy and delicate sponge, it doesn't take nearly as many. Okay. So now the next step is spreading it into our pan. And you want to make sure, in order to get a beautiful looking Swiss roll and an evenly shaped one, that you spread it levelly into your pan. So this is a 10 by 15 inch jelly roll pan, and it simply has the lip on the outside to hold the cake. I've lined the bottom with parchment, but you don't need nor do you want to grease the sides of the pan because we actually want the cake to stick as it lifts and holds in place, and that way you have a nice level cake. So the batter gets scraped into your prepped pan. Your oven should be preheated to 350 or 180 Celsius so that it's good to go. The joy is this cake only takes 12 minutes to bake. And now you'll want to take a palette knife or offset spatula, and I like to coax my batter into the corners first because they're the trickiest, and then I worry about the sides and the center and leveling. So I push, gently coax. You don't need to press too hard. It's a nice light batter. There we go. And then now that you've got the batter in the corners, you can work and feel, it's almost helpful. It sounds crazy to close your eyes because you can feel when you're spreading the batter where the gentle, not lumps, but changes in the thickness of the batter are as you spread it to make sure it's nice and level. So you go back and forth. Good question. Dren Kushpuri is asking, can I use a smaller pan? Now this recipe is developed for this size pan. Keep in mind, if you were to put this in a smaller pan, you're going to have a thicker cake, so your roll might be a smaller roll. It might be just more of a curve than a full few laps around curve. And if you are doing this in a bigger pan, if you can, I have done this before when I haven't had the right size pan, I will take a piece of tin foil and actually block off part of the pan so then I'm baking the smaller, more appropriately sized cake. If you were to make this in a bigger pan, of course you'll end up with a thinner cake. It will cook a lot faster and you could have potentially a really long cake to deal with. So I'm going to pop this in the oven. I'll set the timer for 12 minutes. It will not take longer than 14 minutes to bake. It really does cook quickly. And because of that, I'll be able to show you coming out of the oven how to treat the cake so that we don't get it stuck to the towel, we don't make the surface of it sticky, and we don't get any cracking. I'll make sure I take the time to show that with this cake coming out of the oven. I better set that timer. There we go. The good news is I have a cake already done and cooled, because that's the longest part of this recipe. Once you've rolled the cake in the tea towel to shape it and give it that Swiss roll memory, you have to let it cool, and that can take 20 to 30 minutes. So I have done that for you already. I'm going to come back to that in a second, because what I'd like to do is, while this cake bakes, is make the raspberry cream. Now you can put in any type of filling you might want. You could do a chocolate pastry cream. You could get creative. I love the spring flavors with matcha, so I think of raspberries, strawberries, rhubarb, delicate flavors like peach and apricot suit matcha tea. If you get too heavy with the flavors, I think I would favor white chocolate over dark chocolate to go with the matcha tea, but I leave that up to you. But this cream recipe is relatively simple. I'm going to just take a little peek at the questions you're asking me. And Zahid, you ask a good question. Hello from London. When we post is asking about putting the recipe up before we go live with this video. When we announced the live video choice, when it went up live yesterday, you will find on the text screen right below the video screen, if you click show more, the entire recipe shows up. So you have that a full day ahead. So if you want to bake along, I love it when people can bake along, because we can really handle these questions together as you're going through it. Dorcas and the Sibs. Thank you for joining us. I've seen your name pop up before. Can you use blueberry flavor? I think that would be delicious, especially with a cream would be absolutely fantastic. Even cherry, of course, cherry with matcha tea is a natural. Here was a great question. Does adding the egg whites all at once damage the cake? It doesn't, but you're introducing a large volume of one ingredient to a heavier base batter. So the reason that you almost sacrifice that little addition of the egg whites at first is to lighten up that base batter, so that when you add the rest of them, the whole batter is nice and light and fluffy. If you were to add it all at once, you are potentially deflating the egg whites just potentially a little bit more. So that's why we do it in the stages. That's a great question. Here was I missed the name, but someone is planning to make eclairs. Could I use this raspberry cream as a filling? I think it would be wonderful, because this is a stabilized cream recipe. So let me get to that right now and pull up my next round of tools. We don't have to take a dish break here, only when I crack an egg yolk into my whites when I want to separate them. I've got my cold whipped cream. And my raspberry cream ingredients. So if you've seen my videos before, and I see we've well crossed over the 300 like mark, so I'm going to challenge you again. Let's hit 400. I would love to see that. And I'm excited that I will be coming back again with another live stream in 2 weeks. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But as I mentioned, I've whipped a lot of cream in my day. And you have seen me whip a lot of cream in my day. And you know that quite often, if I'm using whipped cream to stabilize, to frost the top of a cake or dollop on top of a cake or even top cupcakes with, what I'll do is I will add 1 tablespoon of instant skim milk powder to every 1 cup of cream that I whip. And then you can just whip it and go. And it stabilizes the cream enough that it won't separate once it's gone into the fridge. But it doesn't make it terribly strong or straight, so that if you're using it as a filling, and as we are here, this is a simple whipped cream filling, I want to give it a little more stability so that when I slice into the matcha roll, I get a nice clean slice. So we're using cornstarch this time instead of skim milk powder. Now you can't add cornstarch to the whipped cream without activating, without cooking it, and that requires heat. So what I'm going to do is take a 1/4 cup, 60 mils of my whipping cream, And all it takes is 2 teaspoons of cornstarch. And I'm gonna add that to the cold cream, because you always add cornstarch to a cold liquid. If you add it to a hot liquid, it will immediately turn into lumps. And I'll give this a quick little whisk. First cold. And then I'll take it over to the heat. And because it's such a small volume, it will take no time to heat up. And you want to bring this cream to a full simmer to cook out the starch taste and to thicken up this cream. So this will just take a second. It's not terribly dramatic. It's not like making a pastry cream, though a pastry cream would make a good filling here, but I would go through the extra step of making what is called a Diplomat Cream. So a pastry cream is milk with eggs and sugar, thickened with cornstarch, sometimes flour, but mostly cornstarch. But to make a Diplomat Cream, you take that pastry cream, you add a little bit of gelatin to it, you let that cool, and then you fold in the whipped cream so you get that structure and stability. This is simply simpler, and that is the point of it. This cake is actually quite easy to make. I made it in front of you in 20 minutes. It's going to take 12 minutes to, I gotta pay attention, whisk as I cook here, or as I talk. 12 minutes to bake, 30 minutes to cool. You'll have this cake assembled in an hour, which is amazing. So now, that 2 teaspoons of cornstarch and a 1/4 cup of milk, this is your whipped cream thickening base. And in the bakery business, you would actually make bigger batches of this and just keep it on hand. So if you just suddenly have to whip a liter of whipping cream, you just pull that out and you add it to thicken it. This is enough for your recipe. Now we want to let this cool a little bit, but we don't need to chill it completely. So I'm just going to transfer it just to a flat dish, just like I did the matcha tea, to give it a chance to cool. I don't want to add hot cream to my cold whipped cream and have that cream collapse on me. But I don't need to chill this completely because it'll thicken up almost too much. And then it'll be too tight and I risk getting lumps. So I'm just going to spread this. This is not the prettiest to look at, but it serves its purpose. And we'll just let that cool for a second while we whip the remaining 1 cup of fluid whipping cream. And I'll give this a go and take a peek at your questions. I hope everyone's having fun so far and really feeling confident about making this recipe. I know you've got this. You've been asking such great questions. Oh, here's some good questions coming in. Rolando, if you don't have an electric mixer, you do need at least electric hand beaters for this recipe. You don't need a stand mixer. Electric beaters work absolutely well. If you don't have those, there are the hand beaters that you just simply roll. It's 2 beaters attached. As a kid, that's what I used to do. It was always my job to whip the cream. That tool will work just as well. But if you try and do this by hand, I think you might find, if you've got other family members you can invite to help you and just pass the bowl around, that might make the job easier. And Deadhead's asking about the freeze-dried fruit powder. Yes. And the question about Earl Grey going with the raspberry filling, I think it would be lovely. A lemon curd would also be a delicious filling, especially if you're using Earl Grey tea. These questions are coming in so fast and they're so fantastic. Leisha's asking, what's the best thing to have in the morning? Well, I say start the morning with cake. But quite frankly, actually, I prefer yogurt with fresh fruit and a little bit of muesli. That's my regular deal. Wonderful questions. And Ali just made my croissant recipe. I can't wait. If you tag me on Instagram, I do check out to see what people are making of mine. They're fantastic recipes you're all doing. Okay, so we've whipped our cream. And I'm going to turn the mixer back on and add our icing sugar and the slightly cooled whipping cream. So on a lower speed, let's get that 1/4 cup of icing sugar. And I'm using icing sugar just because it dissolves quickly. And now dollop in that thickened cream. It almost looks like creme fraiche or softened butter. And that now stabilizes the whipped cream. So once you use this to fill the Matcha Swiss Roll, it will stay in place, it will slice cleanly, but that cornstarch is neutral in taste. It doesn't impart a taste, which leaves us with, and I've seen the notes come up about the freeze-dried raspberry powder. So I have 4 teaspoons of freeze-dried raspberry powder. And now I order it online. I live in a town of 50,000 people, and we've got a lot of cool ingredients around, but we don't have this, so I just order it online. You can buy different types, and you can buy freeze-dried fruits in whole form and grind them up if you wish. So I have bought freeze-dried blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, and strawberries before. Freeze-dried peaches are another common ingredient that you can order. So whether whole or pre-ground, and you just blitz them in a little mini chopper or a coffee mill until they're finely ground. If you don't have access to freeze-dried berry powder, just use fresh raspberries, except you won't stir them into the cream. You will spread the cream, and this is a case where I would add a little vanilla to the whipping cream because it will not have the powder added directly to it. Sprinkle it with fresh raspberries and then roll up the Swiss roll. I wouldn't do that with a fruit like peaches. A peach is too watery and would weep into your cream and make your cake go soggy, but fresh whole raspberries would be absolutely fine. I wouldn't recommend strawberries either because once you slice them, they let out a lot of liquid. Oh, here's a good question. If I were to use the lemon curd, how much of it should I add into the cream? I think because of the consistency of lemon curd, it has nice structure, just add it to taste. So for 1 cup of whipping cream, I would say half a cup is probably plenty. Any more than that and it might overwhelm. Ooh, and then you could do a lovely sort of swirl as you're spreading it on your Swiss roll. I have 1 minute left on my cake, so I'm going to get it. Oh, it's getting humid out. You can see how that raspberry powder stuck a little bit. And just use my whisk to work in that raspberry powder. If you're new to using fruit powders like this freeze-dried raspberry powder, the freeze-dried raspberry powder does not like heat. The taste will be fine, but what I have found is if you want to add freeze-dried raspberry powder to something like a pastry cream, you want to make sure the pastry cream cools down at least to room temperature before you stir the powder in. If you add it in warm, and I've done this, so I can attest to what happens, it essentially cooks out and you'll lose that vibrant pink color, even though the flavor will be there. So always add it to cold or room temperature ingredients. And I'm just gonna let this sit. You'll see, kind of like the matcha tea powder, that you'll see the granules of, let me check my cake. I don't wanna overmake my cake. I'll come back to this. Yep. Now, to check the doneness of your cake, and this applies to any sponge cake. I don't want this to be in the way. You want to press the top of the cake. And if it springs back, then you know it's done. You also, because of this beautiful matcha green color, you don't want it to brown terribly. So I see I'm getting just a hint of light brown around the edges. That's also my sign that the cake is done. So what you want to do is let this cool for a few minutes. So while, yes, you work on rolling your Swiss roll while it's warm, you don't want to roll it hot from the oven. And that's for a very specific reason. Because it's so hot, number one, it's very fragile. So it has more of a potential to crack and break directly from the oven. But also too, because of its heat, when you go through that process of dusting it with icing sugar, the heat from the cake will dissolve the icing sugar. And it was Khadija was asking about the cake going sticky. If your cake's too hot, you're liquefying the icing sugar. So you want to let it cool for a little bit, but also too, if you work with the cake while it's too hot and you roll it in the tea towel, it's essentially going to steam. And then it could collapse a little bit, and that's too where you get the stickiness and you get some of the cake peeling away from the top. So we'll give it a couple of minutes just to cool before I show you how to roll it. But in the meantime, to pick up where I left off, when I first added the raspberry powder, those granules were visible. But because the raspberries are freeze-dried, they want to rehydrate the minute they're in contact with moisture. So just in a matter of 30 seconds, those granules are disappearing and the pink color is intensifying in the cream. Now, just like I added a touch of color to the cake, you could add a touch of color to the cream if you want to heighten the raspberry color. I think I'm going to leave the raspberry as it is. And the flavor, it's amazing. Because those raspberries are freeze-dried, I would love to figure out how many raspberries are in 4 teaspoons of raspberry powder. But it has to be very concentrated.
Can you lift up a scoop for decaf?
Sure. So here's our raspberry cream, and because of that cornstarch thickening, it really does have a set mousse texture to it. But it's not going to be gummy, and it's not like adding gelatin to a dessert where you get that certain sponginess. This is going to have a moussey, cream-like texture to it. Oh, here's a good question. Lanalat Amla from India is asking, could you use this raspberry cream recipe to frost a cake? I would say 100% yes, you could. You'd get lovely detail. You would definitely want to double or even triple the recipe in order to get the volume, but that is the flavor, would be fantastic. Okay, do you think this is cooling? We're doing pretty good here. If I can actually touch the sides of the pan, I think our cake has cooled a little bit. So now it's time to show the rolling technique. So you want to have a tea towel on hand to use, which I do, a clean one, preferably. And we're going to grab a palette knife. And the first thing you want to do is loosen the cake from the sides of the pan. So you run your palette knife just around the inside. And the parchment paper at the bottom ensures it's going to come off, of course. There we go. Now, to help prevent the cake from sticking to itself or sticking to your tea towel, this is why we dust it with a little icing sugar. Now, the key is not to cover it as if you're covering a tort to present at the dinner table, but just a little bit, just as a barrier. So I think that's a key to help prevent it from sticking, is just don't put too much icing sugar on there. Now we're going to put the tea towel on top, and you can use a second tray, a plate, a cutting board, and I'm going to use my tea towel as actually pot holders as I flip and lift the pan off. And yeah, it has cooled. I can hold the pan at the edges. Mind you, I have tough hands too. So now you've got this warm cake. It's still flexible. We'll peel away the parchment and just another light dusting of icing sugar. Again, not too heavy. And now I'll go towards you, tuck in the tea towel. And when you're rolling the cake, it's not like rolling a cinnamon bun filling where you stay low and towards the dough itself. You actually want to lift and curl as you start. And I can feel it's nice and stretchy, it's not cracking, but this is the key. You want to let it cool enough that it's flexible, but not too much that it sets. And where it's brown at the edges, I can feel it's still moving and it's not cracking, but it's definitely drier. And you don't want to roll too tightly. So just let gravity do its thing. And now you set this aside to cool. And here we go, the one I have already made that has cooled completely is ready to be filled. So now this is why you go through this process. We want to build Swiss roll memory in the cake. So once it has cooled, it's going to stay curled up at the ends like this, but that's part of the recipe. And you don't want to stretch it too far back, so don't push it. Now that it's happy being in the space, we're just going to let it be. It's like having a toddler that has found a toy that it likes and it's happy and quiet. You just let that toddler be and play with that toy as long as it will. And so now we're going to dollop the filling onto the Swiss roll. And give it a good spread. You want to leave a little space at the end because as you roll, you may push some of the cream towards it. And you also want, for your bottom seam of your Swiss roll, you want cake to meet cake. That way filling won't ease or leak out. So now we'll spread it evenly. I can talk and spread. Swiss roll, oh hey, you like the Swiss roll memory. We're all gonna have good Swiss roll memories once you try making this cake. Oh, good question, Evelyn. Can you put in some cooked red bean? I think that would be absolutely fantastic. Please, please, please do it. I think even with the raspberry would be amazing. Here we go. It's more important when you are spreading your cake batter to make sure it's level because the cream filling, of course, is going to move as you roll up the cake. So quite level, but it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. But now, I think it was Amla was asking about using this cream as a frosting on a cake. I think you can see right now how lovely and smooth it does turn out. So it would make a lovely topping to a cake. There we go. I don't worry about the ends too much because I do always trim those off before I present them. And those are the baker's privilege, right? You get to eat those pieces. Now you're gonna make use of the tea towel and roll the sponge cake back up. So you do wanna take care that you're not lifting too high now, just so that the cake is coming in contact with the cream filling. And there we go, and it releases, and not a single crack. I know you are absolutely going to love this recipe, and you're already liking it because the likes are fantastic. I like hitting at least 500 likes, so if you can meet me halfway, and if you've just joined now, I am making a matcha Swiss roll cake with raspberry cream, so go on, just hit like, because I know you're gonna go back and watch the rest of the video. Now let me get my presentation plate here. So at this point, you can wrap the cake. You want the seam side down. Wrap the cake and chill it. And it's already got the light dusting of icing sugar on there. You could put, you could double up on the raspberry cream recipe and cover the outside with raspberry cream. Top it with fresh raspberries if you wish. I have stirred just a touch of matcha green tea powder into some icing sugar. Not enough that I want it to be too pronounced. And I'm just going to dust the top of the cake with that matcha green. You could do a really nice matcha icing sugar drizzle glaze on top. You could really get creative. There are so many ideas out there. But just a nice, even dusting of the icing sugar. And of course, I have to cut into this. Oh, Miros is asking a good question. What can I do if my cake sticks to the kitchen towel? It's like pulling off a Band-Aid. You gotta go quickly. I would rather you do that than risk peeling it away too much because I have had that happen. Use your cheapest, thinnest kitchen towel that you can because it's more porous and will allow the cake to cool faster. If you've got a really thick kitchen towel, that may hold the moisture in and be why it's sticking. But yeah, just pull it away as quickly as you can. Good questions. And I have to say, I commend all of you. You are asking, you're the best. You're the best bakers. You ask such good questions, and I'm so thrilled that I can help out. And I take these questions you ask me to heart, and I put them and apply them to my next recipes that I'm working on. Okay, oh, hi, Cherry. Thank you for joining us. Great to see you. We're getting close to 500. Oh, we're getting closer by the second. I know we're gonna do it. Oh, Ira's asking, what can you use in place of the parchment paper? If you don't have parchment paper, because you really want to be able to turn out the cake while it's hot, you would need to grease your cake pan and then flour it. So what you do is dust flour in quite a generous layer, make sure it's coated, and then tap out the excess, and that will help get your cake out of the pan without Swiss roll. So now, when I serve a Swiss roll cake, I do typically like to let it chill for a little bit, but I think you're gonna find here, even with out chilling, you get a beautiful stability to this whipped cream, and it slices so easily. I'm just gonna lift this on. So before I serve it, I trim off both ends. But look at that gorgeous Swiss roll with that raspberry cream filling. And because of the nature of the Swiss roll, with its flexibility and stretchiness, it has a built-in tenderness and moisture to it. And I find Swiss roll keeps well wrapped in the fridge for at least 3 days, even 4. But that's assuming it's going to be around that long, because once people get a look at this and try it, I know they're absolutely going to love it. And now, oh, and Fatima, you're asking a great question. Can we use this filling for eclairs, cakes, and tarts? 100% yes. Do keep in mind that it is just whipped cream stabilized with cornstarch. So if you're putting a heavy fruit topping on it, it may push it down a little bit, but as a sheer layer to fill a cake, or put on, if you do a fruit tart, maybe put the fruit at the bottom and then top with the cream. And then I know you'll be in great shape, and you're gonna get those beautiful clean slices when you cut into the tart. And yes, we hit 500. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you for watching from Thailand. I see we have had so many people join us from around the world. I love that the comments are still going in. Oh, here's a great question about the Earl Grey tea flavor, because I love Earl Grey flavored desserts. As you saw, you had the choice to vote for my London Fog Madeleines as part of this, and maybe I'll put that on the list for next time around, because I love that. London Fog is a flavor of Earl Grey tea with vanilla in desserts. And so for the 1/4 cup of milk, I would say to get enough flavor in this recipe, I would put in 2 Earl Grey tea bags, because there's not a lot of liquid, so you really want to concentrate that flavor. You could use loose tea or empty the bags, give it that 5 minutes, follow the instructions exactly the same. Just make sure you strain out the tea leaves before you add it to the cake batter. This has been absolutely amazing. I'm getting to as many questions as I can. They're just rolling up so quickly. I thank you for your participation. To the hospitality class in Uxbridge, I thank you for joining me today. I hope you've picked up some great tips and you're interested in making this recipe. You can use the filling in a pie. And Ira, you ask a practical question. Why is a Swiss roll called a Swiss roll? And if we went to Switzerland, would we be able to order it? I don't know if it refers to perhaps an older technique of making Swiss roll where you would make a Swiss meringue that would be heating the sugar and egg whites together, but I don't really know. So when you join me for the next live stream on Thursday, June 3rd, I will have that answer, because that's an excellent one, but I have to actually look up why it's called a Swiss roll. Typically, I differentiate a Swiss roll from a jelly roll as a Swiss roll having a cream filling and a jelly roll having, obviously, a jelly filling. So that's at least a starting point for us. Oh, and Carmen, I like that idea. Having a live tea session, we could build just such an assortment of desserts. I have been working on some glazed petit fours lately, so there's always something new baking around this house. I hope you keep baking. Take all these tips from today's live stream, make them a part of your baking, and know that I am cheering you on every step of the way. Keep your eye on the Oh Yum channel. We've got new stuff constantly coming your way, and it's been wonderful spending some time with you. Now it's time for a little Swiss roll cake. Thanks, everyone.